The manufacture of cloth was a larger, more elaborate West African industry which exhibited a greater degree of specialization and division of labor than any other, and seems to have faced the challenge of European competition with far greater resilience. The market for cloth was large. In the savannah area, the more open exposure of the sun, the dusty, dry seasons, and the influence of Islam culture created patterns of dress which demanded voluminous clothing. In the forest zones, where there was not necessary male and female avidity nevertheless asserted themselves among those with the means to embellish their bodies, and on the coast new styles of dress emerged from the contact with European traders and the Africans from the north. In the 1800s, despite 3 centuries of European cloth imports, West Africans still produced the bulk of the cloth that was consumed in a bewildering variety of fabrics, which utilized almost every substance from which cloth could be made, including animal hairs and the bark of trees, as well as cotton. Much of it was plain stuff produced by village women in the household, but for high quality cloth specialized centers and developed exporting their goods over long distances. These centers produced cotton cloth almost exclusively, and each would have its distinctive shapes, sizes, colors, and patterns, designs. In such places, the definite artisan class, often female, maintained itself almost completely by cloth trade, and the professions of weaving, spinning, dyeing, and embroidering were often quite distinct. In particular, colors and patterns were highly specialized, and the regions of West Africa each had their own rooted preferences, many of which had been carried through to the present in the characteristic colors and patterns of the national dress among Ghanaians, Igbo, Yoruba, and the Mende, etc. The most highly developed centers of cloth manufacture naturally arose in the towns which lay in the thickest clusters of population. Thus, in the Savannah, Kano, Timbuktu, and Kuka were famed centers of the industry, as was Old Oyo before its destruction. The new urban centers arising from the Yoruba Wars developed cloth manufacturing on an extensive scale, and Ibadan in particular became the center of the production of the famous Yoruba blues. Smaller towns would also have their own industry, but often the goods would be simpler and less specialized. The larger centers developed long-distance trades, selling goods in quantity to merchants who would sometimes transport the cloths for hundreds of miles. Cloth from Borno, for instance, could be purchased not only in Hausaland, but in Ilarun and further south in the Yoruba country. It was specialization of pattern, designs, and color, and the excessive choosiness of the West African customer which gave the indigenous cloth industry its ability to resist European competition. In the 17th and 18th centuries, European cloth being mostly woolen and heavy in itself the product of the handicraft industry, was unable to compete in the price or quality, and thus the slave traders had turned to India for a supply of exotic and richly patterned lightweight cottons and silks for the African markets. The Indian cloths were naturally expensive and furnished only a limited demand among African rulers and coastal merchants with the taste of the unusual. After the mid-18th century, the factories of Lancashire began producing cheap cotton cloth on an even increasing scale at lower and lower prices. Before 1880, however, although Lancashire goods increasingly entered the market, they were unable to displace the local cloth. It took years of experience in the trade for European merchants to obtain a close understanding of local patterns and prejudices, and these sometimes varied so greatly from village to village that the factory systems of Lancashire could not adapt its production for such a small unit. Lancashire cloth was also at first much inferior in quality to a handmade local product, and where Africans dressed more for the embellishment than for warmth, quality was more important than quantity. MacGregor Laird, on his Niger expedition of 1830 to 1832, found that he was unable to sell Lancashire cottons in Nupe, despite the fact that his cloth was cheaper than Nupe cloth. In the far north, where the white plain cloth was more frequently worn, the high cost of transportation from the coast delayed the triumph of Lancashire cloth until the coming of the railway after 1911. A History of West Africa, Volume 2. The value and importance of cloth. Stay tuned. The Birth of Liberia from a West African perspective is on the way. Get your copy of the Conscious Community First Pan African Journal from Killmonger's Corner today on Amazon.